We're very excited about the opening of New Weather and a rare opportunity to see all the artists in the exhibition in a discussion with the curator. So way down at the end is Diana Al-Hadid. I guess I hardly need to introduce you since your name tag's right out in front, but nevertheless I will. And next to her is Iva Gueorguieva, and next to her is Robyn O'Neil, and on the end is David Norr, who's going to moderate, give some remarks about the curatorial premise for the exhibition and introduce the artists. So I'm Margaret Miller. I'm the director of the Contemporary Art Museum and Graphic Studio, and we are just thrilled to have these three artists on our campus. If you've never come to the museum before, again, I hope you'll come tonight and visit often. And Graphic Studio, which is on the other side of campus, right behind the Embassy Suites, is also open, and we invite you to come by. I think all three of these artists may very well be working with us at Graphic Studio. And so if you come by, you never know who's there, and you can watch them working. So it is my pleasure now to introduce you to David Norr, curator of New Weather.
Thank you, Margaret. How's my sound? Pretty good? A little closer? Good? A little closer? Great. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Margaret. This has been a really exciting process for myself and I think for the artists to put together this exhibition, New Weather. It's been about a year and a half in the making, and group shows are a lot different than solo exhibitions. Group shows, in group shows when you expect or you work with the artist to create new works, which is what the case was with New Weather, is quite a feat for both the artist and for the institution. And there are a lot of people I want to thank for that, especially at CAM. I want to thank Associate Director Alexa Favada, our Curator of New Media, Don Fuller, and our Curator of Collections, Peter Defoe, and also our Curator of Latin American and Caribbean Art, and our Curator of Education, Noel Smith, who worked behind the scenes to make a lot of things happen for this exhibition. I also want to thank and congratulate and give special praise to the behind-the-scene team at CAM that really make projects like this work. This timeline between the Teresita Fernandez show coming down, which was a very big and labor-intensive install, was very short. And New Weather had to go up very quickly after the Teresita Fernandez show came down. It required an enormous amount of coordination and work, and our team really just pulls it off magnificently. And I think we've got a great show for you to see. So I want to thank our registrar, Shannon Annis. I want to thank Tony Palms, our exhibitions coordinator, Vincent Krall, our chief preparator, and also Melissa Diaz, our curatorial assistant, who worked very hard on many of the details. And also to Margaret Miller, whose leadership shows up in every project that we do. Thank you very much for your support. And most importantly, though, I'd like to thank the artists. It's been a really great conversation that we've had. We've gotten to share a lot. I always say to people, if I'm not learning, then it's not fun. I've learned a lot from these artists. It's really been a really great experience, so I want to thank you all. As Margaret was saying, the format today will be short presentations by each artist, and then after that, we'll all sit together and have a discussion. And it should last about an hour and 20 minutes, just to give you a heads up. So we should be done by 3:30. To introduce the show, the title is an interesting title, New Weather. New is one of those words we tend to avoid with art. It tends to raise eyebrows and cause a little bit of pretension, to say the least. But in the case of New Weather, I wasn't so much interested in thinking about new art objects or the way that things might look in a museum, but rather how artists might be working today. And this exhibition really began, much like many other exhibitions, with a question or a problem to solve. And the question really for me was, what is the value today of studio work, of actually artists working in the studio? Much has been made, and for very, very good reason, of a lot of other ways of working, new ways of working, that often don't involve work in the studio. And that's been a large part of the discourse around art for the last 10 or so years, and an important and enriching aspect of the contemporary art discourse. But it's tend to overshadow some of the things that have been happening in the studio. And as a fearless champion of the underdog, I was very encouraged to think about what artists were actually doing in the studio today, and what we could think about that, and how it might have been cast in a different light, how we could look at it a little bit differently. And to frame these works, the monumental sculptures of Diana Al-Hadid, the turbulent paintings of Iva Gueorguieva, and the virtuosic and enigmatic drawings of Robyn O'Neil, I wanted to find a way to reconsider this territory of the studio as a different kind of place, as a place that's not very essential, as a place that doesn't have many rules anymore, and a place that is really a kind of open container, a kind of sieve or a filter of a lot of different things that are happening. The title, as I was saying, New Weather, when you think about weather, I'm using it really as a metaphor for the kind of physical storm of activity that happens in these artists' work, that happens actually in their studio, the physicality that actually goes into the process of making it. But it also, for me, suggests the possibility that the studio itself can be this place, this filter, for a lot of different processes, both conceptual, historical, personal, and methodological. So I like to think about them as forces, not that are independent of one another, but forces that are entangled in a kind of mesh and that work their way into the artist's studio and work their way into the work. And I think that the way that these artists work is quite unique in the way that they filter these sources and make them work in their work in quite poetic materializations. So I want to welcome you in welcoming these artists. I want to introduce Diana Al-Hadid first. Diana Al-Hadid lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. She received her MFA in sculpture from the Virginia Commonwealth University. Her work has been included recently in numerous international group exhibitions. Recent exhibitions have been at the Saatchi Gallery in London, the 9th Sharjah Biennial in the United Arab Emirates, and she also has an upcoming Hammer Project show at the Hammer Museum in UCLA. She was recently named a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellow in Sculpture and was a recipient of the Paula Krasner Award. Her work is represented by Perry Rubenstein Gallery in New York and Michael Janssen Gallery in Berlin. So please help me welcome Diana Al-Hadid.
Thanks, everybody. I hate alphabetical order. Okay. How do I just go down? Oh. Okay. I start with this one because this is really quick, but it says I make, as David said, large-scale sculpture, and generally they're very architectural. This is called Spun of the Limits of My Lonely Waltz, and it's an upside-down cathedral I made by dancing the waltz by myself. I painted paint on the soles of my feet and then planted the stakes and then flipped it upside down. I started studying architecture, and this is just a reference. I didn't make that. It's the interior of, actually, I think it's Chartres, yeah, or Amiens, no, it's Chartres. And I used that labyrinth on the floor to make this next piece, which is, it's called A Measure of Ariadne's Love. It combines a few things, the labyrinth, which is it's a pipe organ spaceship kind of thing. And it combines that labyrinth for the architecture, the body of the spaceship, and also this specific piece of music, this fugue, and what else does it combine? Pipe organs, I guess, spaceships. You can play it would presumably take you if you played this one song. And I make everything, I cast everything or hand make everything in the studio, so they're not found except for the cardboard tubes. That's another, just a reference shot. Just a pipe organ. That actually was the first one that got me really excited about pipe organs. I spent a year making pipe organs. This is another one. It's called Portal to Black Hole. It was kind of a proposition, like a way. I had heard that black holes emit the sound of B flat, It's really weird. I heard it on the radio. It's like 57 octaves below middle C, and I thought if I could make my like this tempo play B flat, it would take you to a black hole. This is Record of a Mortal Universe. Some of these have really long stories for some of these, so I don't want to take up too much time, but.
You got time.
Okay, well, okay, it's over. This one is called, it's a smaller pipe organ. It's kind of a slice of the Colosseum, of the Roman Colosseum, and it's called All the Stops. I learned that phrase came from pipe organs. It's when you kind of release the stops. It means it's really loud. All the air is flowing through the pipes, so the instrument's making the loudest music it can. And pipe organs are like the mother, considered the mother of all instruments. So they're already really loud. They surround, they're built into the architecture. So I wanted to make, a pipe organ that was built into one of the, greatest architectural monuments, and you would sit in the arena there. And this is Peter Bruegel's painting that inspired the next show that I had. So the year's worth of work after the pipe organs was based on the Tower of Babel, and also was a little inspired by the Large Hadron Collider, which was kind of happening at the same time that my show was going to open. And that's, I think you know about that.
Can you talk about the connection between those two?
It was the collider was, it's like the biggest project. This is underground particle accelerator on the Franco-Swiss border, and it was trying to find a number of things. One of the things that they were trying to find was this thing called the God particle, which is a really complicated, I guess, thing, but it's kind of the thing between all of the particles. I just like the idea, the name of it, and I liked the connection of that with the Tower of Babel being this kind of this collective effort to create something that's so impossible to conceive of. It's the biggest thing in physics and research right now for the Hadron Collider. And the Tower, I like the story of the tower. I really like a lot of religious stories. And I like that one, I guess, because I don't know. I think it was this idea that everyone. It was kind of the nexus of the universe, of civilization, when everyone was all speaking one language, had one kind of monoculture, and presumably when God, sabotaged their efforts to kind of reach Him, it was the beginning of the dispersal of cultures and language, and presumably the beginning of art, as I read. And I think that, I don't know, I found that really interesting, I guess.
Yeah.
Did I have something else? I don't remember if I had something else on that. But I really liked his painting. The painting was the thing that caught my attention initially. I'm also very interested in, this was kind of inspired by that painting. It's called Self-Melt. I kind of carved the top loosely based on that image, and then I made the bottom from the top. It's kind of like this murky reflection of itself. And a lot of my sculptures are kind of unstable or appear very, delicate. They are kind of delicate, but I'm really careful about how they meet the floor. I think of sculptural space, sculptural floors as very, for lack of a better word, religious territory, like very spiritual territory for a sculptor, I guess, for me. And the previous year, I realized I was trying to make all these things. When I got to the Tower of Babel, and even still, I realized I was trying to make all these devices, either a building or a portal or a musical instrument or something, some way to reach something unknown. So it's either like literally outer space, or it's God, or it's it's some territory that's unexplored or unreachable, and I kind of enjoy the absurdity of that proposition on a sculptural level and also on a physical, on a literal level. But then people do it, you know, people really pursue, you know, invest billions of dollars to find the God particle, you know, it's really fascinating. So when I made this tower, this is another Tower of Babel from that show, it was, I kind of imagined that it was built with a team of bees, so it's got these honeycombs with me. And bees, you know, worked in the same way that I imagined that the workers on the original Tower of Babel might have been working. And then it's extruded. I extrude a lot of the sculptures come from something on the floor. So I always start with something very flat, and then I kind of pull it up or pull it back or something. And then you can see the labyrinth is kind of also the architectural, the geometry of this work as well. This is called the Tower of Infinite Problems. And then the one after, this is the Problem of Infinite Towers. It's kind of the inverse. It's kind of the docking station for it, and it's actually kind of made of all the negative space of the other one. It's hard to describe, but trust me. This is an image of the Large Hadron Collider. It's just awesome. And this is a small kind of a smaller piece I made after that show. It's kind of a Babel eating itself. It's called Tomorrow's Superstitions. I called it that because I imagined that, you know, like a lot of things that came out of the collapse of the Tower of Babel were, you know, new superstitions or new ideas of what, you know, tragedy and devastation always produces superstitions or anxieties. And so I wonder what, you know, the future superstitions will look like. So I don't know if that's kind of what I was referring to. And this is another honeycomb bee assisted tower. This one kind of cracks in the middle like an egg. This is called Built from Our Tallest Tales. And the tales referring to the tales that you tell through your, you know, through time, civilizations. Okay, I'm closing in. This is another, just a reference. I'm starting to include the figure more in my work. I mean, of course, it was in the first slide that I showed. That was the cathedral, because I'd made it with my body. So, you know, I was always making things from my body or of, you know, it was like something of a body rather than for a body. And I've never and you know, there'll always be a seat or at least like an exclusion of an entrance into the work. So there's a sense that you're either permitted or not permitted in. And of course, I'm very physical as I move around a sculpture. I'm very involved with it. I can be a little aggressive sometimes. But this year, I really wanted to introduce figuration or just a character, because a lot of my stories had something to do with a person. And so I took this. This is newer work, so the people who haven't, this is from this year. So anyone who saw the talk earlier this year probably saw this. So I'll spend a little more time on this one. I made this one this is by this guy. I don't know how to say his name, but it's like CIAFA something. He's like the South American Bernini, so-called. But it's marble, and I just printed out I scanned it, I saw it in a book, and I loved the attention paid to clothing on a figure. So I'm not so much interested in the fleshy characteristics of the body, but more the position and the fabric and the geometry, the kind of the architectural infrastructure of that position. And in particular, this position of the reclining, you know, the historic reclining female, because I love how lazy and kind of, you know, like nonchalant she looks. So I kind of wanted to put that position into stress So I removed, the base. I've been dropping the pedestal or the kind of ground that she would be on. So looking at that image, I welded small sticks to kind of correspond to the folds in the fabric. So you can kind of see here is like the head, here's an arm. It's really hard to tell in a photo. And I mean, a lot of the imagery of the figure is anyway very obscured. But, I wanted to think of it like drawing a figure by sculpture. And what was interesting is because I was looking at a piece of paper and I could only visualize so much, like I could only invent so much detail, I couldn't like sneak to the back of it. And so because it's a piece of paper I'm working from, so what happened was the side like flattened out completely, I thought. Like it looked like a piece of paper. It just kind of folded onto itself. The front, I thought, looked very full and more dimensional. And then amazingly, it kind of really flattened. And I think that's all I have. And then I have the two at the show. So I think that's under 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Diana. Time is something that I like to think about in relationship to these artists' work. Time, like weather, is a abstract concept. It's a construct, and you can't really predict it. It's quite unpredictable, as we know here in Florida. It's something that I like to think about, especially when I think about Iva's work. I like to think about the time that goes into the work, the different types of time that are spent working on a work, and how that changes work. So when you're looking at Iva's work, I hope you think about that. Iva Gueorguieva lives and works in Los Angeles. She received her MFA from the Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. Her paintings and drawings have been exhibited in solo and group exhibitions in a number of cities around the US and as well in Europe. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce this one. The Stichting Outline? Stichting Outline in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. The Pomona Museum of Art is easier. It's in Claremont, California. Western exhibitions in Chicago, Sanson projects in Boston, 2x2 projects in Amsterdam. Iva has received numerous grants and awards, including the Paula Krasner. Her work is represented by Engels Gallery in Santa Monica, California. Please join me in welcoming Iva Gueorguieva.
You did good.
Hi. When David asked me to put together some images for this discussion, I thought to myself, well, what do I throw in this little quick batch of things? And I thought, well, maybe the most sensible thing to do is to, first of all, the paintings in the show were done specifically for this exhibition and thinking about the work of both Robyn and Diana. And so they represent for me like a very specific time, a very specific experience. And so the images I'm going to show kind of frame things in two directions. One is the first image, which takes me back to this many, many years ago, right out of graduate school and in New Orleans. I like this drawing just because it's kind of goofy, but I think in it I see a lot of what I deal with, which is this mixture of, caricature and character and figure and abstraction as a way to sort of think through my experiences, a way to deal with fears, anxieties, a way to be angry, a way to think. So painting for me is just a way to think. And the studio is that place where I retreat to think in a weird way. All the paintings you're going to see are rather large, and this is another painting that started out as a more of a kind of exuberant abstraction. Upon the request of my husband, he really wanted something more life-affirming, and yet this is called Still November. And the painting quickly turned into a rather violent explosion upon the election of George Bush as the president for the second term in office. And I don't have details, but actually these spaces are populated by numerous small characters that they kind of carry these narrative potentials or act as moments of caricature or a way for me to more forcefully state something. So up on the left between those collapsing towers, which remind me of my childhood. I grew up in Bulgaria, a communist country. You're all familiar with big underwear. Here in the 80s there was some some commercial about underwear. And apparently East Europeans have big underwear, according to this commercial. And we do. Just so you know. But also really big apartment towers. And the thing is, like, I also experienced the same kind of towers in the projects that surrounded me when I was living in inner city Baltimore. So these collapsing towers of kind of utopian architecture and goodwill upon, and there's a small character, he's the deserter, who's rather flayed. I also threw in this image because it's not that I'm interested in performance, but every once in a while I'll do something that's, I don't know, some kind of like reflection upon what the painter does. And I have no idea what this means, but there's many characters in the paintings that sometimes I think that there's in some ways connected to what I think the painter does or doesn't do or wants to do. And this is kind of a silly image, but it's meaningful for, and I think you'll see how it will come back again and again. This next painting is a painting from 2007. It's called Blue Rider. And this painting, I think, it started out as the soft target. And this is where I want to quickly stop and just explain a little bit about how I go about making paintings. First of all, there's always the question, why make another painting? Which I think it's a important question. It's like, why say another word? You're just producing noise, and the same thing with art. It's just much bigger and bulkier than a word. These paintings are rather large. But it started out with a soft target, circle the target. I mean, I don't need to elaborate, like, what the connections are here. And then also the references to, of course, art history, with ceiling paintings and Tiepolo and Renaissance kind of vortices of that represent like ascension or way out or a connection. And it's weird that Diana talking about like this interest in these things beyond, forces beyond, this kind of search for these things. The next kind of a few slides I have to do with these drawing installations that I got really interested in the past couple of years. Fragments, things from the studio floor, and then these growths. And I collaborate with my husband, who is a sound artist, and this drawing has speakers embedded in it, and when you get really close, you hear sine waves. This is another collaboration that we did. It's also a video installation with sound. It's a 2-channel. One is a projection, and the other one is a backside projection of this character, which is, once again, this, I think it's this kind of gas mask rabbit is like the canary in the mine. It's like the sort of the state of things. Nothing happens in the video. It's just this gas mask rabbit guy, me, whatever lady, sitting there. And what's really creepy for me about this, because well, first of all, like being inside of the mask myself, and it really puts you in this rather stressful and claustrophobic space. I don't know if any of you have ever put a gas mask on. I mean, you read about like the First World War, or you think about like, the gas mask seems like such a quick solution. Like the way that I love in Fight Club when they make fun of the little cards in the airplanes, that all the people look really happy and composed when they're putting on their life vests. But I always think, like, if I can do it, like, can I really remember how to put the, and it's also so futile, because like if you're crashing from an airplane, like flying into Tampa, I was like, there's no way. I mean, you crash into this, like, there's no way this little yellow thing is gonna make any difference. Like, so I'm not gonna even bother. I'll probably like draw or like think about like my family or my dog if that were to happen. So there's this like futility and this gas mask is like a solution, the way that in the 50s, like, all of us having a personal nuclear bomb shelter filled with canned foods and a gun would somehow like solve the problem of impending apocalypse. Which takes me to my next slide. This is a very recent painting. This one's called The General. It's a massive thing. The General is another character that reoccurs, and you can see that kind of the connection to the gas rabbit. I mean, there's a lot of like, characters borrow things from one another. It's like, there's this like aspect of pageantry, but also like of confusion of like good guy, bad guy. And even for myself, I'm like the one in charge of these characters, and yet like they take on like different or steal from one another different aspects. Like the General is like the complete opposite of the gas mask bunny. He is the one in charge. He's the one giving the orders. This is also, in a way for me, a portrait of Los Angeles, where I've been living for the past 4 years. It's a city it's an unsustainable monstrosity that every moment I kind of even think about it, I think of the way that it just sucks out the life from miles and miles of the West, because it draws all of its blood from capillaries that extend all the way to Colorado, and its energy and everything. It's so awful, and at the same time there's this kind of bubbling energy and verticality, and I do love living there. Very quickly, 2 minutes? What?
Yeah.
2 minutes. Klineman, this is in the show. And then the last two images are of the paintings that I've just finished. They're sort of the companions to the paintings in the show. And this is a giant vertical painting. And this is a quick detail. I call it this one is called Clothos, Lachesis, and Atropos. It's named after the three fates. And there's this kind of iguana eye that moves around in the space when you look at it, and it's pretty cool. I didn't intend it, but it worked that way. And last one is Scimitar in the Storm. And this one, there's three characters in it. On the one on the right is a bride. There are always like stuff in the news about another wedding in Afghanistan got blown up by a drone. And I always think about like all these people in their festive attire getting blown up. And so there's this bride with her scimitar cutting the belly of the General, who is all the way on the right, and this like failed attempt to protect the boy. And the boy, for me, is this character of that combines two kind of conflicting ideas, both innocence and ignorance. And I think about that a lot. All of us sitting here, perhaps we're all innocent and perhaps we're all ignorant.
Thinking about Eva describing her relationship to Los Angeles is also another thing that I think about in relationship to their work in general, which is an idea of progress and what that means and what comes along with progress. There's a theorist named Paul Virilio, and
Back in the 70s, I think he wrote a very interesting text that's pretty famous by now, but he talks about our measure of progress being speed, and often speed is really quite relative to technology. And he describes, though, that any technological innovation, which then presumes some sort of sense of progress, also comes built in with it an accident or accidents. So you can't have one without the other. And I think that all of their works deal with that in a variety of ways, that paradox of progress. And I think you'll think about that quite a lot when you see Robyn's work, who I'd like to invite up in a moment. Before, let me introduce you. Robyn O'Neil lives and works in Houston, Texas. Robyn also has been in numerous solo and group exhibitions, including solo exhibitions at the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston, Texas, which traveled to the Johnson Museum of Art in Cornell and the Frye Art Museum in Seattle. She was also in the 2004 Whitney Biennial. She's this year 2010, this coming year, it's close by. 2010, the Des Moines Arts Center is hosting a survey of Robyn's most important works to date, and I look forward to that, a big publication coming out with that as well. She's a recipient of numerous grants and awards, including a Joan Mitchell Foundation grant, a Hunting Prize, and her work is represented by Dun & Brown Contemporary in Dallas and Praz de la Valade in Paris. Pretty good. That was pretty good. Please help me welcome Robyn O'Neil.
Hello, everyone. I'm loud, so. Is that all right? Okay. I'm going to time myself because I'm talkative as well. So I got to jump right in. I have way too much to say. So this is my intro slide. I didn't create the program, Roseanne. I wish I had. This is John Goodman as Dan Connor. The reason I am starting with this today, I've never done this before, but it seemed really appropriate to give you a quick idea of probably what the main influence is in my work, which was growing up in Nebraska, even though this was in Illinois, pretty close, with just regular guys, as I like to call them, and I say that with as much affection as I could possibly pour into it. You know, my dad and his best friends were always fascinating to me. I never spent a lot of time with, we didn't have a lot of women in my family other than my mom and grandma, who are also important to me, but when I went to graduate school for art, it was in Chicago, and I immediately felt, we've seen cute John Goodman enough, let's go on. I immediately felt very uncomfortable in my position as an art student and as an artist, even though I never had a doubt that's what I wanted to do from the time I was a little kid. For whatever reason, I'm at constant conflict with that, and I just missed my family, I think, and for some reason I developed these cast of characters which are all middle-aged men, oftentimes pretty schlubby, and they all wear these black sweatsuits and Nike tennis shoes, and they ended up looking really cultish. And even though this was the weird transition where they were, they actually looked just like the Heaven's Gate cult people, if you guys remember that. That was very haunting to me, seeing those people draped under their blankets with their shoes poking out. But also, real simply, Bruegel did it too, or, you use, I don't know, they look like ants. Once I started multiplying these men by hundreds, you'll see in a second. I'll go back to that in a second, but really quick, you can see there's like hundreds of guys in some of my drawings, and so once you do it like that, Bruegel even wrote about it, that people end up looking like ants, which was, I'm sort of playing God here in these drawings, so it was nice for me to be able to make these men all look alike, yet have them doing such varied things. In any one drawing, this was the first time I was able to work large. I went from working on a table about as big as this podium to getting a grant, or I don't know what you call it, to go to Art Pace in San Antonio. It was a residency. So all of a sudden I had a room like this big times a million, and I always knew my goal was, if I had space, to make a large-scale drawing where I could multiply these men by hundreds and get them, since I'm the conductor of this world, to do everything possible. They throw up, they jog, they give each other flowers. Who the hell knows where they come from, because this is snowscapes. But anyway, they find them and they give them. So sometimes they're nice, oftentimes they're awful. So this is where it ended up being a little bit different from an appreciation of my family into using these men that I developed as an archetype for humanity, and then illustrating how I see the world and how uncomfortable I see us humans as being in this world. And then nature is a different thing. So, back in this time of my work, there's so much about nature and so many trees and animals, and with the animals I treat them so beautifully and tenderly and naturalistically, and then with the humans I purposely drew the men really awkward, and I wouldn't say cartoony, but almost. They all looked a little bit off. Also, this is kind of related to Diana's. This piece was based on the Garden of Earthly Delights. So, well, maybe it's not, but I mean, I'm just trying to fit in. I've also sometimes pulled from art history, I guess. So now I feel like I'm worthy. This is just another example. This is huge. Oh, I guess you saw from scale that image of me in front of it. These are like about 15 feet by 8 feet. And this one, it's just another cross-section of people doing everything under the sun. Again, I think the reason in Chicago that this notion came to me of drawing people doing such vastly different things right next to each other, I mean, even when I stand in front of people all the time, I'm thinking, like, I guarantee, like, I don't know how many people are thinking about whatever, their boyfriend, or maybe something like really awful while I talk. And when I lived in this apartment building, I mean, I can't live in a city. I have to really remove myself. That's something we'll probably talk about. I live in a pretty lame suburb, but purposefully because I need to just get away all the time. I'll quote, one of my favorite writers is Patricia Highsmith, and she said something to the effect of, I think I might have it written down. I don't know where it is. I don't know. I'll find it later. But her brain can't function when she has to speak to people. And I kind of have that problem. But here we see, I just think even in an apartment building, you can have one, think of 3 rooms together. One room, you could have 2 people sitting on a couch falling in love for the first time. The next room, you could have someone, like an art student drawing a still life of a skull. And in the next room, there could be someone plotting a really savage murder. And I find that fascinating. And we all just go about it, no big deal, but that's really like maddening to me, which is why I can't be around all of us very often. So, and again, I say that with love to all of you. This is, even my trees are pretty anthropomorphized, I guess, and these trees are in an embrace. Sometimes I'm sweet, and sometimes this was all the people in this one were hugging, and even the trees are hugging. So this is Ingmar Bergman's film, The Virgin Spring, which is, I think, what I would consider one of the original revenge movies, and the most beautiful one. And this is Max von Sydow's character. It's the most amazing scene. Everyone should just go check it out. But he's wrestling a tree out of frustration. His daughter was raped and murdered, and that's what he decided to do with his frustration. This is a close-up of another really big piece, but this is a really personal one for me, and this is about my grandmother's death. She's the whole reason I was deciding to be an artist, really. So this is a piece I wanted to read, a poem. Don't worry, I'm getting towards the end, but yell at me if I'm not. This is The Poem That Took Place of the Mountain by Wallace Stevens. There it was, word for word, the poem that took the place of the mountain. He breathed its oxygen, even when the book lay turned in the dust of his table. It reminded him how he needed a place to go in his own direction, how he had recompassed the pines, shifted the rocks, and picked his way among the clouds. For the outlook that would be right, where he would be complete in an unexplained completion. The exact rock where his inexactness would discover, at last, the view towards which they had edged, where he could lie and, gazing down at the sea, recognize his unique and solitary home. Then I'm on to Caspar David Friedrich. German Romanticism is hugely important to me. Just the stance of the Rücken figure here, which is German for kind of from behind, has this contemplative positioning of the human figure that has ended up being really important to me. And you'll see kind of a version of it in the show, even though I'm pretty much void of human life now in my work. This is a film called The Enigma of Caspar Hauser by Werner Herzog. Film and TV are all immensely important to me. I watch TV in my studio every second of the day, and I could go on and on about this, but you can see, I mean, it's carried on. Werner Herzog's also German, so there's something about that. This is a huge piece, probably my biggest one. I don't know, but it's 15 feet by 8.5 feet or something. It's based on the medieval allegory of the Ship of Fools. There's hundreds of men scrambling for their lives there. This is when I sort of cast all human life off into the ocean to try to survive. Good luck with that to them. And then this is the last one. This is sort of my last man I ever drew, pretty much, like this anyway. It's called These Final Hours Embrace at Last. This is our ending. This is our past. It's also that big, and it's this monstrous ocean eating this person up. He's hanging by a fraying thread. And it's really interesting. It's a litmus test into personalities when people look at this, especially in real life. So, people in Texas where it was first displayed, really sweet ladies would be like, I just see him climbing up to heaven. And not me. Not me. not at all. This is where things started to get really a lot more poetic and mysterious. This was around the time of Hurricane Ike. You here deal with hurricane weather as well. I've been a volunteer weather watcher for since I was 18, which Diana loves. That means I call in the highs and lows of the day, and I take rain gauge measurements, and I pick my favorite meteorologist and give him. But I mean, it helps really accurately tell the world, for the history of weather, what was happening in a certain location. So this is sort of, this seems surreal, but it's not. I mean, when you live through a hurricane or a tornado, this is kind of like a still life of what you see. I was going to talk about this. That was when I was going to talk about my weather watching. But anyway, this is another more kind of slightly poetic image. But just like this erasure, things just started to get even more somber as things were a little bit more obviously kind of violent and complicated between people. And then I removed the people, and I think things got, to me, a lot better. They could seem to be a little bit more dull drawings, but that was really purposeful in me. I mean, I didn't want over-the-top reactions. I want these to be pretty unassuming, even though they're large. And again, I don't take the temperature just to record the way I just described it. I think I see weather everywhere. I see weather, kind of like David was explaining for our show, as something, it's kind of like this fog over all of our gray matter. It's this chemistry between two people when talking. It's the sadness in people's eyes. It's what's released when we die, to me. I mean, I just see it as something so much bigger than this activity that I do every day with the temperature. So I see that in all of our works, too. That's it.
This way, because, well, thank you all. Thank you, Robyn. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Diana. Yeah. How's that?
Can you see all of us? Should I?
Well, I need to be able to see all of them because you can tell they're all very independent and they like to speak, and that means I have to have control over this group.
Good luck.
It's not going to happen. It's been a real pleasure to work with these three artists, and Eva mentioned that I think that this has been very unique for me because I've been able to work with all three of you with a conversation, and Margaret often tells me you have a hunch, you have a very good hunch, and she's right. I had a very good hunch, and I've learned a lot about a lot of things, but I've been moved a lot too, and you can tell I've been moved to laugh, and I've been moved to tears with these artists' work, and I think that's a special quality that all of you have, and the way that you think about your works as well, as not being only tragic, but also comic. I thought we'd have a conversation for about 30 minutes, and that's a great amount of time, I think, to get into a lot of things. Something that's always really poignant to me about their works, about your works, is how much you make, first of all, but that's not really my question. My question is really about, Eva, when you were talking about your figures and the characters that appear in your work, how much of that is in your work before you make it? How much of that is kind of presaged or planned in what you do? And to follow up with that, what is the relationship for all of you, between process and between ideas, between process and concept? I think that's a tension in artistic practice now that's very relevant to think about how art itself becomes a thought or an idea, something that we can discuss, which we like to do at the museum a lot. But what I'm interested in is how careful that process is. And I think your works, all of your works, are very thoughtful, and they're filled with ideas, and they're filled with thoughts. But I wonder how that works with your process, which seems to me to be more of an explosive kind of process, an indeterminate process. You mentioned the word Klineman. So maybe you can start, and then we'll follow up with both Diana and Robyn.
What was the first part?
What's the relationship between process and the ideas that follow?
Well, first of all, I have a really, really deep mistrust of ideas. whenever I have an idea, I immediately try and forget it. And so because I think that when you have a good idea, what a place to start. How boring to just implement some kind of idea, right? On all sorts of levels, I'm not interested in ideas, but there's an aspect to ideas that's kind of violent and too willful and too arrogant, and I'm always trying to negotiate a space in the paintings where there could be like a suspension of that. I mean, of course, like I'm there in the studio making the painting, and like Robyn was saying, the conductor of all the little guys. And yet, there's this sometimes like a really clear sense that, wait a second, I think that character just showed up. I didn't do it. And it's not some kind of mystical channeling of blah, blah, blah. It's just, it's a way of thinking through like the kind of like excess of thought. I think when you're just operating from the rational, from will, it's, it's pragmatic, it's clear, but there's all this like dirtier, messier excess. And when you're just invested in a process, like you tap into that part. And that feels more real, and whenever it's happening, I do a lot in the studio. And when it's not, I read, I pick my nose, I look outside, I listen to Pacific radio, and I get really upset, and then I try again. But it's this like, negotiating of that relationship.
But Diana, would you call it intuition?
Probably. Probably. I mean, I don't know how to, I am interested in ideas, but I think I'm interested in, I think I might be the opposite. I think I'm interested in every idea, but it's more interesting when it's how it's expressed. So maybe it's maybe we're saying the same thing, but we were saying last night, everyone has ideas. They're like,
You can say it.
I'm not gonna say. I'm in school. But yeah, I don't cling to ideas. I'll just answer that. What's the relationship between process and the ideas that follow? I'm really more, sometimes I don't know what I'm making. I may have a clue, like I may have a small piece of information, something I heard on the radio or TV. Like I think we're all living in the same space and time generally, but then we select which parts matter and which ideas matter to us. And yeah, I care about ideas, but I care more about, it's like a trick. Like it tricks me into making something. It's like an excuse usually. And I don't really care if the idea is real or true, like if it's an actual fact, that a black hole emits, a note. I don't, that could have been in a movie, I would have probably used it. But I do care more about the way that idea gets expressed, and I think that's true of any art. Obviously the way, the means. But I don't usually know. To look at the work now, it's so weird to give a talk and show show the work like as if you had this coherent, singular aha moment from the beginning. That's happened for me like twice in the past 4 years, where I knew very I could give it in a sentence. I could say, I want this to do that. I want an upside down cathedral. I knew that. But I didn't, in a lot of other works, like the works in the show, I've become more improvisational, and maybe that's what I would use instead of intuition, because I don't really even know what I'm intuiting. I do trust that when you commit to the first curiosity that you want to explore, that will taper the rest of the decisions that you're making, so that the world isn't so big anymore. It's easier, it's less anxious. So it's good to just start with something, and it may be, usually, often for me, it's a material curiosity. So I do a lot of just material experimentation. So I'll say, I wonder what would happen if I combine this and that, and will it stand? And then proceed, you know, so.
Will literally stand.
Both, yeah.
Well, Robyn, your earlier work was a lot more narratively set and staged, but your later works, I've been trying to think of metaphors all throughout this process of working with you, and there's a great artist, Robert Smithson, who talked a lot about geologic time in relationship to a lot of things like literature and art. And he would talk about sedimentation, he would talk about igneous rocks and their formation, which are often created by hot lava. And I think about Iva's works and Diana's works is often like a volcanic process that creates works. And I often think about your work as a kind of sedimentation of ideas, especially your more recent works. So.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is, and I think we all come from this same grounding where there is so much input in our heads, and when David has been forced to be around all of us together, I mean, it's like pretty intense. We're all three intense human beings in different ways, and so I just know how much is going on in these heads here, and for me, I always think something that really bores me is A plus B equals C, especially with art, with everything. And you know, you see that a lot. I did it a lot as a student. I hope I don't do it anymore. My influences that I put up, you can't really see very directly I mean, you don't see John Goodman's face. I mean, I have a friend who likes Bob Dylan and makes Bob Dylan portraits, and while that's fine, I would like to see her marinate with this a bit, you know. So I like A squared plus 19,000, you know, to the whatever. It's much more interesting. So I don't even know, except I do know that I calm down when I have an idea, if this is what we're saying, and I just slowly in my brain assess it. Luckily, I do something very repetitive with what I do. I only use a mechanical pencil, so I'm at something for, you know, months sometimes drawing one of those waves, and I have time to really decide what's a really ridiculous notion. Does that kind of make sense?
That does. It does a lot. It's good. Well, I brought up the word intuition because it's kind of a bad word, but it's a tricky subject also. I don't think that intuition's actually the right word, and I think that you've helped clarify it for me. Something that I also think about in relationship to your works is an idea of abstraction. And I've told you all that my idea of abstraction, I've come to this, is because abstraction as a concept can be so essential sometimes, or specific and polemical, and historically rooted in certain canons of thought. But I tend to think about abstraction when something that's made can be more than one thing at once. So a line can be a line, but a line can also be a horizon line or a swath of dirt. And it's something that I think about a lot in all of your works. I was using Robyn's work as an example because that gauge of abstraction, that separation, that space between two things, between it being like this material exploration, the way that a line hits the page, and that it is a line, and it is an act, and it is a kind of thought about the act, and the way that it is maybe a cloud is happening more and more in your work. So I wonder if you could start talking about that.
Yeah, and I hope, you know, with this in mind, when you see the show, you'll really see it in one piece where I have a very detailed drawn head from the back and a very raw cloud-type shape above. And that's my almost direct response to my grappling with my natural tendency towards abstraction, which I fought for a long time. I remember being really angry with a friend of mine who, with one of these tree trunks that I drew, and it was like a tree trunk, and then the other piece had all this water, and he's like, you know, you realize if you turn that tree trunk horizontally, you drew the tree trunk exactly the same way as you drew the water. And I idiotically didn't know that. I just thought, I mean, that's just where my brain was. It was drawn this way, so it was a tree. And then I started to see it in everything, like little pine trees were just like the hair of my men, and everything was becoming one thing. It was almost like when you were talking about the Tower of Babel eating itself. What ended up happening slowly in my work, and you could kind of see it here. First of all, horizon line was up top, and it had mountains. It slowly got to the very bottom. So, I mean, the sky was eating up my entire world without me meaning to do that. So that was something where my process dictated a lot of what happened without me necessarily planning that, but it was a perfect way to like close out the world. And that's when I realized, I think I've been making many abstractions. If you were to pull, I mean, huge parts of many of my drawings, if you even pulled this out of it, it's an abstract drawing. It happens to look like a certain image when I have it all together. So now I've got my piece in the show that's almost all water and a little bit of sky. If you blow, I mean, it's an abstract drawing, basically. It's water because you've seen previous work, but I think if you hadn't, it's an abstract drawing, and I'm really taking ownership of that now and appreciating it, because what's wrong with my work doing that? And then knowing the history of where I've come, I think it's a really interesting and really somber transition, you know?
You know, Diana, I often think about that relationship in the way that you work, in the way that you transfer forms into kind of new materials, which often seems to be the case with your work. And there's an investigation in materials and into bringing to some sort of semblance or resemblance to something else these material experiments. And that's where I often think about abstraction existing in your work.
Yeah, I mean, it probably does come from trying to invent something. I mean, or trying to reconsider or misinterpret something. So probably I'll study that decision very carefully, and then extend it into, for a greater cause. I don't know how to place it.
Well, like the cardboard tubes, you describe them as cardboard tubes, which are in some of the work that are in the show, but they're no longer cardboard tubes in the show.
Right.
They're
Well, I have a tendency to interrupt that. I mean, I'm very inspired by found materials. I just don't tend to feel satisfied. Like, I just want to, I want to affect everything too much. It's a control thing, maybe. But I really want to force my will, so I don't like to let things be politely as they are. So I mean, unless it happens to be just exactly what I'm looking for, it's just so rare that something comes out on the streets of Bushwick as like a spaceship, like a perfect spaceship wing. So I have to make it, it's really hard to find what I want. So it's not like I prioritize it, it's just what works for me. And I'm always surprised when something is abstract, because I feel like I have really, in my work, because I feel like I have a really concrete narrative, and it turns out no one knows about it when it's done, and I'm always surprised but I think it's coming from having collected more than one point of, more than one source.
Right.
So, kind of making it more muddy, making the origins muddier, produces something that didn't exist prior. So then it must therefore look abstract, I think.
Okay. What about you, Eva?
Well, I think the whole question of
You
abstraction
pull
is
the
really...
mic a little closer.
Oh, the whole question of abstraction is really funny, because as you pointed, there's like this rich history, but I think that there's all these presumptions and assumptions, like abstract paintings are supposed to be okay in institutions, for example, because they don't seem to have anything offensive in them, right? They're just abstract. But here's an example. A bank bought one of my paintings, which was called Big Sun's Plane Mutants, right? And then 6 months later, they returned it to the gallery because finally somebody noticed that there were crashing airplanes and mutants. But, how could have anybody looked at that painting and not have seen that? It's beyond me, really. But I think that there's ways in which, at the same time, my tendency towards abstract, my engagement with abstract has to do with this kind of ambiguity, this opening of space for the surreal, for the amorphous, for the hallucinatory, and it's this openness and doubleness that is so interesting to me. And it's what I think what you were saying is really true even for my paintings, this kind of transformation of the paint, the cuts, the glued materials, and then everything kind of moving in and out and entangling and becoming actually pretty difficult to distinguish as to like what its actual more pristine characteristics might have been, as whether it's a mark or a cut or so I think that it's a complicated but
Yeah. Well, I think the viewer also has an experience with your work that's also about time. Every time I've looked at one of your paintings, Eva, I turn around, I look at it again, and I see another mark, I see another layer, and I see another area that I didn't quite notice because they often merge, and it's really hard to separate things sometimes. But that's a quality of your work that reflects its making, and I think that also exists with Diana's works and Robyn's works.
but also the experience of looking. I mean, I always think about the experience of looking, because in a way, like when you're making something, it's actually satisfying your own desire to see something that didn't exist before, right? I mean, in a way, like it's like you want to see what like a 10,000 little man would look like in that on that white piece of paper. And so, I mean, I think that like to just see something and move away will be a shame, right? In a way, like the paintings, like the fact that they unfold over time. The fact that like I have people who've lived with the painting say, my God, like I always thought that this like one area was quite serene. The other day I looked and it was an army of like green kind of penises like marching down. Did you do that? That was like almost like.
Did you?
I don't remember.
Related to that, and Diana, you brought this up, is this idea of invention, which is also rare in the contemporary art world, I think. And it was striking to think about your works, while they have sources that are rooted maybe in specific histories or in art history, and there's a kind of reflection of things that exists in the work, or a filtering of things. There's something remarkably anti-photographic about your works. They don't translate that well. And in this hyper-mediated world where we're so used to creating equivalences through images, I think that the way that you work in your studios interests me because you're not relying on that. I wonder if you could talk about that, if you think about that. It also means that it's harder to photograph your works sometimes, but I think that it's an interesting element. Robyn, what do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you think of the Italian Renaissance. I mean, you think of like before people really understood spatial relationships on 2D forms for me, and I love it. Like right before it seems that everyone kind of figured it out a little bit better because it's so much more awkward and things are slipping into other planes, and they invented ways to make something look like a background where people are standing in front of it, and they invented ways for us to look like we're kind of standing next to each other but a little bit removed, or our hands coming like this, and that is just more jarring and more resonant for me. So yeah, I don't work with any photo sources next to me when I draw. I even did tests in the early days because I actually collected a lot of martial arts books, and I don't know why, but I had a lot of like images of men like wrestling and things that would have been perfect resources for me when the men wrestled, but I would do tests and I would look at how it looked when I kind of am glancing at it, and then when I wouldn't look, and I would just imagine what a guy would look like if he was doing a certain position, and it would always be well, whatever. It worked better for me that way without looking at the photos. And people often, we've talked about this, people often think I know everything about birds and trees just because they happen to end up in my works, and I'm sorry, I don't. I stay in a lot. I'm not an outdoorsy kid, so I have made up birds that people will always think, oh, and they can't figure it out. They're like, kind of looks like a swallow, and I just don't know because it works for my work better. If I'm trying to fit things in all the time, it would just be dumb. I mean, it would really, like, why wouldn't I just don't understand how I couldn't. And then I have a really big interest in outsider work as well. So invented spaces, I mean, it's a huge part of what I do. it just ends up looking more wobbly, more confusing, and yeah, people have to figure it out a little bit longer, so that's good.
What about you, Eva?
Same. I mean, I like photographs. I even just subscribe to the National Geographic because, you know, I like looking at photographs. I like looking at going to see photographs in galleries and museums. But for some reason, I never had ever the urge to, you know, put a image next to my paintings. I've never done it, and it never made any sense to do it. It's also like, I mean, it would be like this kind of translation. I mean, I don't know, maybe because like, you know, I'm always translating English into Bulgarian to English. I mean, I do this all day long. Why would I do that in my paintings? Like, the paintings are such a direct experience. Like, I don't need to translate a photograph and besides, like, that I feel like there's plenty of other people doing it. So, and they're doing it very well. So I feel free from the
Right.
need.
Oh, can I also say, usually the source material is more interesting as is. Like those books of wrestlers are pretty great on their own. I don't need to use those, you know? I think that's something a lot of students sometimes need to hear too. Like I needed to hear it a lot because you're constantly telling people, no, this is good, leave it. Maybe put it on the wall and move on. And, you know, it's weird. Source materials, leave them. Make your own, you know?
I tend to, I do that too. I leave them on the walls, and by osmosis, maybe they come in. But, yeah, I had a long history of drawing when I was a kid. Like, I'd take, like, an average, whatever, someone would give me their niece, a photo of, like, a Crayola advertisement or something, and I'd draw it literally from the image, you know, for
Right.
hours. And I just snapped out of it one day, and it's more fun, I guess, not to, because it's like, it's the same thing as, you know, why would you paint that painting if it's been painted? Thank God someone's done it already, so you don't have to worry, you know? And it's part of like knowing that if you have a good idea and someone else has the same idea, they already did it, well, great, it doesn't have to be done. It's been done, you know, so.
I want to say another thing, going back to the abstraction thing, I also think like there's certain way that, you know, the photograph, it's already like once removed, right, from an experience. Like I think that like if you try imagine a tree, like you sort of remember more than like just the image, like what it feels like, what it smells like, and then like all that goes into, because like, I mean, even though in my paintings maybe there's not like as obvious of images, but I do like think of like what like a foot feels like, or like the way I don't want to touch anybody's feet. You know, like this kind of like relationship to the and with the photograph, there's this like abstraction that takes place, this removal, and I don't know. I think it will be really
A
detrimental.
mediation.
Sometimes you can add more, and sometimes you end up at like it sometimes being less. Like I kind of like when like it's a really like inaccurate, you know. When I was trying earlier this year to use a photo and like really try to make a sculpture out of it, I like finding that it failed, or like it kind of fell a little short, or something different happened, whatever it was.
Right.
You know, that I like that it was beyond my capabilities, and what comes of that is fine by me, usually.
Getting back to the idea of technology, and I think this is a relative idea, it's not a rule, but I think your interest in folk artists is interesting to me, and maybe you can talk about that in a minute. Because there's a kind of idea that I think is an interesting idea, which is that our world is changing so rapidly, and there's so much technology for us to relate to, and because of all that technology that surrounds us, this storm of technology and images and this hyper-mediated world, that we ought to sort that material literally through those exact processes and sort of mirror them and present those processes and use that technology in art. But something that I think is evident in what we've said already is the separation from that world that happens when you go into your studios, even though you're completely absorbed in media and you're all on your phone
2 minutes before we were going to start. They're all on their phones still. So, you know, it's hard to separate. And I think that's an interesting idea of the kind of isolation that's possible. And also to present the idea, the possibility, that the most radical thing you might be able to do is to actually go into your studio and work alone with some paint and some canvas, which is, I think, an interesting possibility to present. I don't know what you think about that. Maybe nothing.
I think a lot about it. I think we touched on it when I mean, for me, I have a love of tradition in art making, and I've talked about how much it means to me that the cave paintings in Lascaux exist, and what that means, the broad implications of that a human's instinct is to record, you know, animals, humans, and nature. You know, they made basically little worlds there, and it's just, I don't even know how to explain how much that means to me. And so I try to basically continue that tradition. I'm just one person just doing it, and I try to do it with bigger things in mind. But, you know, I just don't think, you know, for me, I don't need any of that other stuff to have any real results in my work. I mean, I use pencil and I use a mechanical pencil and paper, and that's it, and that's all I've done for 10 years or something. And it seems a little crazy. It actually seems a little like a folk artist, you know, and I think that's part of why I was a painter for a long time, and I just pushed it off, and I was like, what can I do that's super minimal and simple and unassuming? It's like pencil and a paper. You don't get any more basic than that. And I really want to continue to challenge myself for the rest of my life if I can make, maybe it won't always last, maybe it's already not interesting, but I want to try to make this interesting until I die, and without allowing anything else to be a part of it. Like, it seems pretty labyrinthian. It feels like it could go on forever. I mean, so anyway, does that kind of relate to it?
Definitely.
Okay.
Well, I mean, at a really basic level, I mean, I think for all the technology and for all this, it's still in the realm of fantasy where we're not just the silly, funny bodies that we are. I mean, for all the equipment and all the slick laptops, I mean, we're all still really awkward. We can't run very fast. Like, we barely see, we barely hear. I mean, for the most part, I mean, I look at my cat. I mean, she's like this incredible machine. Even though she's cross-eyed and, you know, pretty domesticated, she's never caught anything but a feather. But still, compared to, like, you know, the human body, like, she's actually a pretty elaborate, you know, physical machine. And I just think that, like, sometimes, like, we forget how, like, actually still, you know, basic our experiences and our needs are on a day-to-day basis, and in, like, the larger arc of, like, what birth and life and death are. And I think, like, I mean, it's like, it will bring me to tears to think about, like, yeah, it's like, you know, the pencil, the paper, maybe it sounds like silly, but I don't think, I think if we all step back for a second, like, you know, it's not so silly. I think it's real in a weird way.
Diana, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I feel like I don't tend to take much of a position about like pro or con for technology. I'm kind of disinterested. Like, I feel like good art can be made anywhere and anyhow. So I mean, I just do what I do because that's what satisfies my, but there's still good artists that do the opposite of what I do. Mm-hmm. That's fine as long as it's good. I mean, whatever that is. I don't tend to take like you know, I'm not like fighting for my team, but I do really care about sculpture, and I don't really care if no one else cares or if people want to argue. I won't argue about it with anyone. I'm not going to argue if painting or sculpture is dead or alive, because maybe I'll be the last one making it. I don't care. There will be people making paintings, and that conversation is so dull to me. The conversation about if is this important to go into the studio and you have to make things with your hands? And it's good for other people to point it out, but I won't be part of it. I'll just do what I do, and if you don't like it, it's okay, you know?
Well, that answers that. Okay.
Oh, I gotta say though, but I wasn't saying, I mean, God, all my favorite artists are
Yeah.
video artists, so.
Yeah.
But I have to speak for me. This
Right.
is what I do, and if I
But
don't have a
I
position.
know that about you too.
Yeah.
I mean, I know
Yeah.
that. I feel like we all have that. Even though we represent something, it's not to say that we are
Yeah.
you know, like that we would antagonize the opposite.
Yeah.
It just has to be good.
Yeah.
It has to be considered. So.
Okay, well, we're going to end here because we only have about 5 minutes left. And thank you for being a patient audience. It's been about an hour and a half.